fractions to decimals using number chips. This is the Christmas version, and it's a digital lesson that teaches students the different methods for changing a fraction into a decimal. And it's a lot of fun with the number chips as students can move these numbers around their screen in order to solve these problems. So the first slide 2, is fairly simple. It's just asking students what we multiply times each of these numbers to get 100. And this is going to walk them into that step of changing a fraction to an equivalent fraction with 100 in the denominator. So all they have to do is move the number into the correct place to show that multiplication. So 50 times 2, and all they have to do is click on the edge of the chip, and then they can move it into place. 20 times 5, 10 times 10, etc. The next slide has students actually converting fractions to equivalent fractions with 100 in the denominator. Now, as it moves through these lessons, as they get more difficult, if the numbers aren't working when they get to the end of a slide, they know they made an error somewhere and they need to go back and check. So in that way, it's self-checking. They have to use every number. So here, we know we have to multiply 50 times 2. So if we multiply the denominator times 2, we have to also multiply the numerator times 2. And the colors don't matter as long as the numbers are correct. That gives us an equivalent fraction of 1800ths. Here we have to multiply numerator and denominator by 4. And that gives us 20 hundredths, and so on. Now the next slide has a review of place value. So students are just given instructions where to place each of these numbers. So for example, place your 4 in the ones place. They need to click and hold on the edge of the 4 and place it here until they've placed all the numbers correctly. The next slide has another method for changing the fraction to a decimal. So the first method would be to look at these fractions that already have 100 in the denominator. So we want to look at the numerator. The number in the ones place is going to go in the hundredths place of the decimal. So we know that if we look at the arrows, this has to be a 9, the number in the ones place of the numerator. So once we've placed the 9, then we just place the numbers in order. And then this number has to be a 0. So here we have 13 hundredths as long as we have 100 in the denominator. That number in the ones place of the numerator is going to go in the hundredths place. And then this has to be a 0. And then here we have 180 hundredths. So that 0 is going to have to go in the hundredths place. And if we just place the other numbers in order, we're going to get 1 and 80 hundredths. So the next slide, they're going to get some practice. So 55 hundredths, they have to place that so that 5 is in the hundredths place, and the 2 also. When they get to slide 7, they've got one that's a little bit different. This is 5 hundredths. That 5 has to go in the hundredths place, and that means these other numbers have to be zeros. So the 5 has to go here, not here in the tenths place. And then they've got a couple with 3 digits in the numerator. Now when they get to slide 8, now they have to convert it first to an equivalent fraction with 100 in the denominator, and then change it to a decimal. So here we know the denominator has to be 100, so we're going to place both 100s in the denominator. And if we multiply times 50 here, we're going to multiply times 50 in the numerator. We get 50 hundredths, which would be 50 hundredths as a decimal. Here we have to multiply times 25. That would give us 75 hundredths and 75 hundredths as a decimal. And they've got a few more slides to practice with some different denominators, but they have to convert them to an equivalent fraction first with 100 in the denominator. Same thing on the next slide. Now when they get to slide 12, they can't convert that denominator directly to 100. There's no number I can multiply times 40 to get 100. So I'm going to have to simplify this fraction first. So if I simplify 6/40ths, I divide the numerator and denominator by 2, I'm going to get 3/20ths. Now I can convert it to an equivalent fraction with 100 in the denominator by multiplying by 5. And if I multiply that numerator by 5, I get 1500ths. And now I can change it to a decimal, 1500ths. Same thing on the next one. Now we get to slide 13. Here we're going to simplify, but when we simplify, we're going to get 1/8, which we cannot convert to an equivalent fraction with 100 in the denominator. That means we're going to have to use long division. So this one, the problem's been set up for them. They just have to use their numbers to do the division. So 8 goes into 10 one time. If I multiply, I get 8. Subtract. And they need to know that these numbers are just going to continue as zeros. So now I can bring down a 0. Now I go back to the divide step. 8 goes into 20 2 times. 8 times 2 is 16. So this is good practice for that long division also. And then subtract, I get 4. Bring down another 0. And then 8 goes into 40 evenly 5 times. So now I've changed this fraction, 1/8 or 3/24ths, into an equivalent decimal, 125 thousandths. The next slide has another problem for the students. They have to simplify and then divide. And then the final slide, they're going to have a repeating decimal. So they've got this movable line that they're going to put over the 6 here. And when they get to slide 16, you can go over some different vocabulary relating to decimals, terminating, non-terminating, and repeating. So this is the Christmas version of fractions to decimals with number chips.